So volatile were the passions unleashed by McIver's findings that it would be more than 2 decades before another qualified archaeologist was allowed onto the site. In 1929, Gertrude Caton Thompson investigated Great Zimbabwe, again at the request of the British Association. Her pioneering work in one of archaeology's first all-woman digs confirmed McIver's discoveries. Every object she found was of African origin and medieval date. In her own words, she soon tired of the Phoenicians. Local settlers, meanwhile, made plans for a golf course in the ruins. That contempt for archaeological truth would only intensify when Ian Smith's white government broke with the British Commonwealth and rejected demands for black majority rule.
But Richard Orr's attempt to interpret Great Zimbabwe perhaps can be excused in the sense that this was a time when people really had a very, very sort of backward view about African civilization. What is surprising is that even during the UDI days, the days of Ian Smith, we find that Great Zimbabwe, that there is an attempt to try and discredit the connection between Great Zimbabwe and the Africans.
In 1971, the head of Rhodesia's Antiquities Department resigned after receiving a secret directive from the breakaway white government. The directive prohibited any mention of the possibility of African origin in the official guidebook distributed to tourists at the ruins.
It shows the mysterious elliptical building, the ghost of the Queen of Sheba, and an African bowing down and offering tribute to this foreign power. And this is precisely the colonialist myth that was perpetuated around Zimbabwe for nearly 75 years.
In 1980, after a bloody civil war, the government of Rhodesia came under black majority rule. Finally, the people of Zimbabwe were free to search for their past among the ruins from which the newly independent country had taken its name.
What is important is that now, for the first time in the last 10 to 15 years, a body of African students are beginning to learn archaeological techniques and apply their own understandings, their intimate understandings of African culture to African archaeological sites, not only in Zimbabwe, but in many of the surrounding countries.
But the questions remained. How much of Zimbabwe's past could be reclaimed from the stripped ruins, and how much had been lost forever? The first people to settle at Great Zimbabwe were cattle farmers, who arrived in around AD 350. They were drawn by rich grazing land and a temperate climate free of the tsetse fly that plagued the cattle of the African lowlands with sleeping sickness.
The reason why Great Zimbabwe became a very big urban center is mainly due to the wealth accumulated from cattle wealth. There is quite a lot of evidence to show that the people at Great Zimbabwe were keeping quite a lot of cattle, and this cattle was used initially for local trade, and the wealth from the local trade went on to fuel international trade with the East Coast.
The people who would settle and exploit this rich region were ancestors of the present-day Shona people of Zimbabwe. They built mud and stick homes in and around their evolving stone walls.
Pottery, the pottery which was made during the Zimbabwe period is the same as the pottery which is made by the Shona people today. So that gives us a direct evidence to show that it was built by the ancestors of the Shona. The site was first occupied around 1900 AD. This was when they were not building in stone. They started building in stone around 1100 AD. And from 1100 AD to about 1450 AD, the site was occupied, and it grew from a small village to a very big urban center.
Pottery shards and beads dating to around 1100 testify to the city's rapid rise as a commercial center. By 1300, the Zimbabweans were trading their gold and ivory down the nearby Sabi River to the coast, exchanging them for beads and porcelain from as far away as China.
And what you see here are examples of Arabic pottery. This is the decoration fused into the shed, and these are Arabic pottery ware with this one, which had a small piece of lettering, Arabic lettering at one end, but it's not very visible now. And the rest you see are Chinese, which came in through trade.
In the 1300s, as Europe was nearing the end of its Middle Ages, the great Zimbabwe's master masons began work on their most enduring monument, the Great Enclosure. More recent than the hill ruins, the enclosure testifies to the confidence and skill of a thriving culture.
For example, the entrances up the hill, most of them are round entrances. In the valley and in the great enclosure, you tend to get square entrances. You also tend to get quite a lot of conical towers within the great enclosure and the valley ruins. I think this is a development which comes in later when people now add on new things with development of skills. They can now do quite a lot of other things which they couldn't do in the hill. And this is seen in the great enclosure with the conical tower, as I said, as well as with some of the platforms, which are very, very sort of intricate. There is also a new development at the great enclosure, the idea of decoration. The decorations are now much more elaborate, as is shown by the double chevron pattern at the back of the great enclosure.
"20,000 tourists now visit the Great Zimbabwe each year, eager to reclaim for themselves some of the city's rich heritage. Clambering among the ruins and scavenging for keepsakes, they are taking their toll on the ancient stone walls. The caretakers of the site have recently enlisted the help of modern technology to preserve the labor of long-dead masons. In the most fragile areas, each surface stone is marked and entered into a computer. When walls collapse, advanced architectural programs will plot their reconstruction. Berzak Dubé surveys the walls with a keen eye for signs of structural failure, classifying the walls into 3 categories of vulnerability.
The walls that normally collapse are the P walls. Our walls are generally small walls and they normally don't give us problems. But P walls collapse most of the time because the bonding between adjacent blocks is not very good compared to the Q wall styles.
Why Great Zimbabwe itself finally crumbled is still a mystery. At its height, the city may have had some 18,000 inhabitants, as many as medieval London. Archaeologists believe that Zimbabwe, like many large cities, simply overtaxed its resources.
There's quite a lot of exploitation of the land. This led to erosion, clearing of forests, and this led to shortage of firewood. And again, with time, with the exploitation of the environment, this could no longer be supported, and hence it was abandoned.
The truth Zimbabweans may have understood was the one expressed by the archaeologist Gertrude Caton Thompson in 1929, when she wrote that an African origin for the Zimbabwe ruins enriches, not impoverishes, our wonderment at their remarkable achievement. It cannot detract from their inherent majesty. Rising out of the heart of Africa, the great Zimbabwe is today a monument to a mighty African civilization that thrived while Europe languished. The city's ruin will forever bear the scars of ignorance and racism. But her true African origins and the greatness of her people can never again be denied.